Okay, moving on to our session 3 for this module of level 1 in wines, introduction of level 1s in wine. Uh, we would now talk about different wine terminologies and characteristics that involve the wine world and the wine making, the wine production, things like that. Uh, the first and the foremost important terminology would be dry wines. Often you would see in the wine world people talking about, oh, tasting a little wine and saying, yeah, oh, this wine is dry. And yes, the majority of wines out there in the market are dry wines. But what actually do you mean by the term dry when you're talking about wines? It literally means that during the fermentation process, the entire amount of sugar that there was in the grape juice has been converted into alcohol. So there's no more sugar left in the wine. And that is the kind of wine what we call as dry wine. So since there's no more sugar in the wine left, the wine is called a dry wine. One of the There are certain quite a number of examples, as a matter of fact, but the ones that we're going to talk about really and focus in this level one would be the famous dry white wines and red wines of the world: Bordeaux, Burgundy, Rioja, Chianti. So all of these are obviously regions, and these are the few examples of dry wines that we have. Um, The second category of wines and the wine terminology, as we talk about, is well, that's the example of dry wine. I'm just going to point my stuff here, right here, and you can see it is a Bordeaux. It's right in here. It's a Bordeaux. So that's your example for red uh, dry wine. I'll just take it off here, better that way. Okay, so the second one would be the medium sweet wines. Well, these are the wines that, well, as the name suggests, are medium sweet. So there are a few ways of making these medium sweet wines. One of them is if you add grape juice into the wine to increase the sweetness. It does increase the sweetness of the wine, and there is a lot of wine making that happens where this particular process is followed. But generally speaking, the wines are not of great quality when you add grape juice, unfermented grape juice to it. It really just increases the sweetness without increasing the overall flavor profile of the wine. So basically, that is one of the options. The second option is to remove the yeast. During the process of fermentation. So what you can do basically is by either chilling down the entire the process. When you chill the entire tank down to let's say about 1 degree or a couple of degrees centigrade, the yeast becomes inactive, and then you can take the yeast off. What remains is a wine that has undergone partial fermentation, and where the entire quantity of sugar, all the sugar in the wine, has not been yet converted into alcohol. So you get a wine which has alcohol, but not entire sugar in the wine has been converted into alcohol. So you still have some residual sugar left in it because the yeast was made inactive during the process of fermentation. It was not allowed to convert all of sugar into alcohol. Thus, you get a medium sweet wine. Examples: cream sherry is one of the examples. In cream sherry, you do add some grape juice, or you add some wine which is rather sweeter actually. And then there are certain Rieslings. Riesling is a grape, is a white grape. There are certain Rieslings, especially German Rieslings, that are of medium sweet level. Um, okay, so that is that. And that's the example. That's a Riesling. I'm just gonna take my pen here, and that's a Riesling right here. It's not very nice, but just rub it off. So that's a Riesling. Um, One of the examples for medium sweet wine, and we will proceed to the next slide. Okay, right. So continuing with wine terminology, uh, sweet wines. One of my favorite topics, as a matter of fact. Very underrated around the world. There was a time about 100, 200 years ago where sweet wines were more famous than the dry wines. But obviously, in the 21st century and the late 20th century, the trend sort of changed, and people started focusing more on the dry versions than the sweet wines. But yeah, the sweet wines are, in my opinion, something which is some wines which are really underrated. And as a matter of fact, they are more difficult to produce. They take a lot of time. They take a lot of effort. They take a lot of labor and manpower to be produced. And one if they're made properly, if they're made with care, if they're made with love, sweet wines of the world, some are, they are uncomparable to anything else in the world. And that's what we're going to discuss on this slide, and that's why I have sort of given an entire slide to the sweet wines, because I think it's very important for everybody to know uh, how underrated this particular aspect and this particular part of winemaking and the wine world is. So let's start. Extremely high levels of sugar. The sugar levels can range from anywhere between 100, 150 grams of sugar to 450 grams per sugar, for 450 grams per liter, grams per sugar. Um, so you can imagine that's a lot of sugar per liter. A few ways of making it is either natural, obviously, one that has been initiated by nature itself, um, and others is obviously half natural and half man-made. So first we'll discuss about the natural way of making, the way that it has been made over centuries without much intervention from man, is a concept called noble rot. So noble rot is basically a fungus that attacks healthy grapes, and it attacks the bunch of a healthy grape, but it doesn't attack every single grape on the bunch. So what happens is the berries that the fungus actually attacks on, it bores little holes on the skin, and as in the process of doing so, the moisture inside the grape starts to evaporate. As the moisture evaporates, the grape shrinks in size and now concentrates its sugar level and concentrates its acidity level and concentrates its flavors. So basically, a grape becomes almost the size of a raisin, with extremely high levels of sugar and extremely high levels of acidity. And as the grape shrinks, the flavor profile of the grape concentrates and everything becomes so much concentrated. There are some really, really great wines made this way. Sauternes in Bordeaux is an entire region dedicated to only sweet wines. Tokai, again in Hungary, is an entire region dedicated to wines made from noble rot. And then again, there are a lot of places where this process is followed. But what is important to know is that just like any other fungus, noble rot only grows uh, um, in certain conditions, only attacks certain berries, doesn't attack the entire bunch. It has to be humid, it has to be a little wet as well. So there are a lot of factors which go in a particular region where noble rot is prevalent, and every region in the world doesn't have that. So well, it's fascinating, actually, as a matter of fact, how nature has developed this mechanism of only having noble rot in certain places around the world and not everywhere. So we need to be thankful for that. So that's one way of making sweet wines. That's almost 100% natural. And there you go. So that is what no, a bunch which has been affected by noble rot. It looks disgusting, guys. I know that. It looks really bad, but these things produce the best wines in the world, the best sweet wines in the world, and they are extremely expensive as well. Okay. Okay. Moving on. Second way is the late harvest. Basically, it's this. It's a process. It's a concept where you harvest later than the usual. If you're supposed to harvest today, do you leave the grapes on the vine for about a couple of more weeks or a few more weeks, depending on the winemaker, and allow the grapes to build up more sugar than usual, and then obviously you make wine from these grapes. You'll be getting wine which is sweeter. Third, important, very important as a matter of fact, the process is which has been followed again for many years in Italy, in France, and other places around the world, especially old world, is where you harvest your grapes and then you let them let them evaporate. You lay them down on mats. You lay them down in a room which has ample air. You laid them down so that over a period of time, over a period of 3 months, 4 months, the moisture inside the grapes, it evaporates, and as it evaporates, the sugars concentrate. The grape berry becomes smaller again, not the size of a raisin, but obviously not as big either. And after 3 months, there are chances that about 40% to 50% of the moisture of the grape has been evaporated. And then you take these grapes, you start the fermentation, and you make wines like that. Or some of the examples of Insanto, which is made in Italy and also in Greece. Recetto della Valpolicella, which is a very old wine from Valpolicella region in Italy. These two wines are made in the same exact way by drying the grapes. There can be one grape, one particular grape, or there can be uh, a mix of few grapes in this. So, uh, and then obviously you do your fermentation with these grapes which are high in sugar content, and you get a wine which is going to be definitely sweeter. Um, Another way is addition of alcohol, which is called fortification, as we talked about in the fortified wine slide. Um, so what happens is, if during the fermentation of a wine, if you add distilled alcohol, if you add a spirit, if you add a distilled spirit, a grape spirit or a brandy, this increases the percentage of alcohol in the wine, and it kills the yeast. I mean, nowadays, obviously, everybody's using sanitizer, and their sanitizer in your hands works as an antiseptic. It kills all the microbes, it kills all the microorganisms. So same concept works in here as well. The only thing is that the alcohol that is being used here can be ingested by human beings. So you add brandy or grape spirit, high alcohol brandy grape spirit, it kills the yeast. As it kills the yeast, the fermentation gets stopped because the yeast cannot anymore convert the sugar into alcohol. So you get a product which has residual sugar in it, like port. So port is made this way. This, and some other fortified wines are made this way as well, but we'll only talk about port. So that's another way of making your sweet wines. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, moving on with wine terminology still, we're going to talk about three different factors that affect the structure of a wine. Uh, we have discussed one already, and that would be tannin, but we're going to discuss it again. Tannin is something that is present in the skins of black grapes that we had discussed in the earlier slides. It comes out, it gets extracted by the winemaking process during wine production from the skins of the black grapes, and it is uh, a compound that gives that mouth drying sensation and also contributes quite a bit to the flavor profile of the red wine. It's a very important component of red wines, because what it does, it also acts not just as a contributor, as a backbone for flavor profile, but also contributes very importantly the aging factor of the wine. You would have noticed, and you would notice, is that most the wines that you find out in the market that is aged for maybe 10 years or more than that, or maybe 5 8 years, are generally red wines, because of the fact that since they contain tannin in them, tannin acts as a preservative and helps them age better. So tannin is extremely important for the structure of the wine, and also very importantly for acting as a preservative for the wine, which helps the wine mature for a longer time. The second component we're talking about is going to be body. So, body is what you feel the wine seems like when it's in your mouth. It can be a light-bodied wine, or it can be a full-bodied wine. A light-bodied wine, obviously, meaning which is subtle, which is refreshing, which feels light in your palate, which is not very heavy. I often compare light-bodied wines with skimmed milk, and I always compare full-bodied wines with full-fat milk, because that gives you an idea as to what the feel of the wine would be on your palate. So wines like Pinot Noir or Pinot Grigio are generally light-bodied wines, and then the big, bold red wines like Cabernet Sauvignon or Californian Chardonnays or Chateauneuf du Pape are, bigger, richer. They've got a heavier mouth feel on your palate when you have it, and that is why they called full-bodied wines. So you can have a light-bodied wine, you can have a full-bodied wine, you can also have medium-bodied wines, the ones that are somewhere in the middle. So body is another very important character that the wine has, apart from tannin. The third is acidity. Acidity is again gives a lot of structure to the wine. It's basically the wine's tartness, how the wine makes you feel. It's the refreshing aspect of the wine, and you will generally feel acidity on the side of your palate right here, and as soon as you taste a wine, if it's very acidic, you will feel your mouth salivating quite a bit, and that is a mark of wine. Generally, all wines have acidity, but varying acidity, obviously. Some wines are naturally high in acidity because the grape would be high in acidity, like a Sauvignon Blanc. Some are sort of medium acidity, and some are low in acidity. But uh, make sure that you never think of acidity as a bad thing. It is not. It's a very important aspect of the wine. It is the wine's refreshing aspect, and it gives a lot of structure to the wine. If there is too much acidity or there's too less acidity, it can make the wine go out of balance, and that is when the wine would be termed as maybe either flabby or too sharp or too tart. So tannin, body, and acidity are three very important, along with obviously sugar and the sweetness, which we already spoke about. And these three or four aspects maintain the balance in the wine. Any of these are out of bounds, and that is where you'll see the balance of the wine goes a little here and there, and that's not a very nice thing, and it's not going to be a very nice wine to taste either. Okay. All right, so now we'll move on to wine aromas and their flavor profiles. Wines, different wines taste different. Some have the same or almost the same kind of flavor profile. Um, it can come from the grape itself because different grapes have different characteristics. It can come from the fermentation process, the flavor profile, and also it can come from aging. Um, Wines can have flavors and aromas of fruit and vegetables. White wines can have um, flavor profile and aromas of citrus, gooseberries, green apples, golden apples, white pear, lime, lemon, grapefruits. This is a general flavor profile for wines that for white wines that come from cooler areas. Then wines can also have profile like the vegetal side of the aroma and the flavor profile, which is cut grass, asparagus, tomato leaf, green beans, cucumber, or if you're talking about red wines, some of them can have aroma and flavor profile of cherries or strawberries or raspberries or cranberries. Or white wines, certain white wines, not all of them, can have um, tropical fruits like passion fruit or peach or pineapples. Um, for the big, bold red wines, you have a flavor profile. You can have a flavor profile like blackberries or black plums or black cherries or blueberries. So this is a general sort of a wine aroma and flavor profile that we're talking about. Um, you can have these, you can have some of these, you can have different wines with different kind of aroma or flavor profile, but I've tried to sort of put everything together on one slide. This is just generic flavors. Or the wine can have flavors that come from oak aging, which include vanilla, spices, coconut. If you have those kind of flavor and aroma profile of a wine, you can deduce that it has seen some sort of some wood at least. Another is minerality, and now minerality is a little difficult to explain. It generally refers to wines that give that flinty, minerally, limestone, chalk, oyster shell kind of a flavor profile, generally seen in white wines, especially ones that come from the soil which has been in past at some point of time, be it ocean. So the soil has that marine biology. It has shells and limestone and chalk as a subsoil. So that is the kind of flavor that the wines pick up, and that is reflected in the grapes later on. So minerality is one of those things. Although it's a very difficult thing to explain, it's something that you develop a nose for, and you develop finding that out in a wine over a period of time of tasting wine. So um, I wouldn't let that confuse a lot, but just remember minerality is something that it's basically, as people say, it's basically licking a wet stone. Although I'm sure nobody has or nobody would do, but that's how people rather explain it. Then there's malolactic fermentation, which gives um, dairy-like, butter-like aroma and flavor profile. And malolactic fermentation is not actually fermentation; it's actually conversion, wherein the harsh malic acid in the wine are converted into lactic acids, which lactic acid is generally in milk and dairy. So that's where the word malolactic comes from. So wines which undergo malolactic fermentations are the one which are generally higher in acidity. So they just have to undergo that conversion just to make it a little softer for the consumer, and that imparts that dairy-like characteristics to the aroma and the flavor profile of the wine. So these are the common aroma and flavor profiles of wines, whether it's red or white, depends. Um, uh, uh, you're talking about oak, you're talking about minerality, you're talking about malolactic fermentation. So all of these are very important factors when you're talking about aroma and flavor profile of a wine. You need to understand that wine can develop these flavors in from the grape, can develop from fermentation, and it can also develop from aging. Okay, now we move on to common grape varieties and how they taste, how they smell. So the first and foremost, obviously the most famous, one of the most famous are the ones which is Chardonnay. Now Chardonnay is a very common white grape which gives out flavor and aroma profiles of citrus, of golden apple. In warm climate, it gives out tropical fruits like pineapple and peach. Um, Chardonnay is also one of the white grapes which likes oak. Not all Chardonnay is oaked, but some are. And obviously, when you talk about oak, as we spoke about in the last slide, it gives out vanilla, it can give out coconut, it can give out spices, and that is imparted in the wine over a period of time. It can also, if it has undergone malolactic fermentation, give out notes of dairy. So that are common, characteristics of Chardonnay. Citrus, golden apple, could be green apple as well. And so Chardonnay is one of those grapes which is very easy to grow, and you would see that Chardonnay is pretty much available in every continent and every wine producing nation. So but the important thing to understand here is that Chardonnay, just because it's the same grape everywhere, that doesn't actually mean the flavor profile of the wine would be the same. A Chardonnay growing in Burgundy would be different from Chardonnay in California. So it all depends on the weather and the climate and the terroir of that place, which gives different characteristics to the wine coming from different regions. So, Champagne, Chablis, and Burgundy, Chardonnay is grown in these three areas. These are the cool areas, the cool regions of the world. When you talk about the warm, Australia, California, South Africa are the common areas where Chardonnay is found. Chardonnay is, as a matter of fact, found everywhere in the world when you talk about Europe or South America or South Africa or Australia or New Zealand or the US. These are just some common regions, and all of this is also in your study guide, which is which you have along with this presentation in more detail. You can always refer to your study guide. Okay, moving on. The second white grape that we're going to talk about is Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc, again, very famous, just like Chardonnay, but obviously not the same, a little different, a lot more aromatic compared to Chardonnay. Again, you'll get a lot of citrus, lime and lemon, because Sauvignon Blanc is high uh, acidity grape. You'll also get a lot of vegetal aromas like grass, asparagus, gooseberries, very common with Sauvignon Blanc. And in warmer areas, you might get some passion fruit, some tropical fruit as well, perhaps sometimes in the New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs. Um, Common regions for Sauvignon Blanc include Sancerre and Puy-Fumé, which is northwest France. in the Loire Valley. Bordeaux, which is again in France, and Bordeaux, it's generally blended. It acts as a blend with some other grapes. And then New Zealand, where it has made quite a name for itself in the past few decades. Very high quality Sauvignon Blancs coming out from New Zealand. So that was your Sauvignon Blanc. Moving on. Okay, so the third white grape that we'll talk about is Pinot Grigio, or Pinot Gris as it's called in France. So it's Pinot Grigio in Italy and most other places around the world, and Pinot Gris in France. Green apples, lime, white peach, white pear. Um, Very sort of a neutral kind of a wine, medium to high acidity levels, medium bodied, very common as well, especially in Italy. That's where it comes from. But if it's made correctly and cared for in the vineyard, grown well, and if the quality is good, it can make some very good wine. Common regions would be Italy, of course, Alsace in France, then Germany, and the New World region of Oregon has sort of come up in the last few years, and it's proving to be very good as far as the quality Pinot Grigio are concerned. So that was Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, and Pinot Grigio, your three very common white grapes. We will move on to red grapes now. Okay, now let's move on to the black grapes. We covered white grapes, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio, or Pinot Gris. Moving on to common black grapes, the first and the foremost, obviously, I'm sure that everybody must have heard about this, is Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Sauvignon is one of the black grapes, one of the most famous black grapes, as a matter of fact. This will give you blackberries, black cherries, blueberries, and some vegetable aromas like asparagus, beans, grass, vegetable aromas like things like green peppers. It loves oak, so you'll get that flavor profile from the oak, like spices and coconut, and things like soft spices. So Cabernet Sauvignon is a very famous black grape, which comes from generally these regions right here. Bordeaux. Bordeaux is one of the most famous regions for Cabernet Sauvignon, where it's blended with Merlot, and you can say it's sort of a home for Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Sauvignon is a thick-skinned grape. It has a lot of flavor profile in the skin. It gives wines which are, robust and round and big. So it's one of those big, bold boys, if you would. Other areas, regions that you can find Cabernet Sauvignon would be California, of course, Australia, Chile, Argentina, South Africa. Being a black grape that needs, a lot of, well, not a lot, needs a reasonable heat to mature, to ripen. You won't find Cabernet Sauvignon in cooler climate. It will generally be moderate to warm. And if you see these areas right here are whether it's Bordeaux, California, Australia. Australia can be really hot. So all of these places, it's quite warm, and that's the best for Cabernet Sauvignon. It gives, it's enough heat for Cabernet Sauvignon to ripen properly. So yeah, blended with Merlot in Bordeaux, and Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz blends are very common in Australia as well. So very important grape, very common grape, found all around the world. But we will stick to these regions just as mentioned over here. And moving on to our So another still on our black varietals is another grape is Tempranillo. Now, Tempranillo is a very famous grape in Spain and Portugal. That's where it shines really. It gives a lot of red cherries, tobacco, strawberries, black plums, hint of raspberries as well, earthy flavors it can give out as well. It loves oak and is matured quite a bit in oak. There are certain um, grand reservoirs. There's Rioja, and the rest of Spain is very famous in Spain and Portugal. Rioja, which is again a region in Spain. This is where Tempranillo really shines, and the best quality Tempranillos, come from Rioja. Rioja reservoirs, grand reservoirs, can be matured in oak. Uh, use oak for almost 20 years. So you'll have grand reservoirs going back to 20 years. So that's quite common, as a matter of fact. So there's a lot of ageability factor in this grape. It can age quite a bit. Um, in Rioja, it's blended with Garnacha, which is another grape common in Spain, south of France, and Portugal. Not so much in Portugal, but Spain and France. In France, it's called as Grenache. In Spain, it's called Garnacha. So it's blended with Garnacha in Rioja. In Portugal, it's used in making one of the famous fortified wines, Port. So it's one of the grapes that goes in making port. Overall, it's not a really common around the world apart from parts of Europe. But nonetheless, Tempranillo is one of the great grapes of the world, one of the few very, very famous wines, whether it's Port or Rioja or others across Spain and Southern Europe, are made by Tempranillo. So it's very important that we know about this. Moving on. Oh, okay. Now, keeping the best for the last. Pinot Noir, again, a very, very famous black grape, makes some of the most elegant wines in the world. Um, Red fruits predominantly, red cherries, strawberries, raspberries. You get a lot of you get a burst of red fruits with this one. You get a lot of earthy flavors, mushrooms, wet undergrowth, things like that, and some Pinot Noir also undergo oak aging that gives it the nice spicy, coconutty, vanilla uh, flavor. Now this grape is exceptionally finicky. Okay, it's one of the most difficult grapes to grow. It doesn't grow very well if the temperatures fluctuate during the vintage. It is susceptible to various diseases in the vineyard, so it's not an easy grape to work with. Saying that, if it gets the right care, the right vineyard management, the right winemaking, it can make some of the most elegant wines in the world. Most likely, um, if you look at it now or you go back 100 years, you will see, if you check the most expensive bottle of wine in the world, most likely it would be a Pinot Noir. So that gives you an idea about the elegance and the finesse and the quality of Pinot Noir. Champagne, Burgundy, New Zealand, and Oregon. So Champagne, it's one of the grapes that is blended with Chardonnay and a few other grapes for making champagne. So that's one idea of the elegance of this grape. Then, of course, Burgundy, the home of Pinot Noir, the best um, Pinot Noir come from Burgundy, and then New Zealand again, very, very um, good region for Pinot Noir. Oregon again. So all of these regions are very, very, very prestigious regions for Pinot Noir, especially the Old World Champagne and Burgundy. Saying that, this is not one of those grapes which you'll find in every nook and cranny of the globe. It is a cool weather grape. It doesn't like warm weather or even moderate weather. It tends to get a little jammy if the temperatures rise too much. Uh, um, there are very few places around the world that can produce quality Pinot Noir, and the ones that do are on this slide. Um, Very quality driven fruit. I mean, you probably would not see a Pinot Noir which is which is cheap or which is economical. You will see it coming from other regions, but when you're talking about quality Pinot Noir, you'll have to pay the price for it. Okay.